Welcome to the Season 3 of Power Talks. During the Season 1 and 2, we had the privilege to meet and question dignitaries from around the world. Season 3 will be a series of special episodes based on a particular theme or an issue compiled from Season 1 and 2. In today's episode, we are covering the objectives and works of the United Nations and its various agencies, whether it be the top leadership of a country or the grassroots population. The United Nations serves mankind all over the world. When it comes to the UN's role in Nepal's development, its peace process, sometimes we are confused because we have UNMIN, which is probably the predominant UN agency in Nepal right now. Then we have the UN and its several agencies. And then we also have OHCHR. Can you please explain us the differences and the specifications of the UN agencies?
We're a big group. I mean, I like to say all of the UN's assets are deployed in Nepal, at Nepal's request, obviously. It's political and security assets, and that's, of course, UNMIN. It's human rights team with OHCHR, the whole development, and all the humanitarian actors of the UN are pretty much present in Nepal. UNMIN, as you say, is the most important presence of the UN today because of the very important historical peace process that Nepal is in the middle of. It's come with a Security Council mandate. It has a very specific mission. My part of the UN, which is the development and the humanitarian part of the UN, is not a political mission as such, but rather it is very much all about the peace. Our mandate and our work is very much organized around supporting Nepal's peace process. But our function, if you will, is to make sure that the root causes of the conflict are addressed. For that reason, our presence is a much longer term one. We've been here for almost 60 years. We may be here another 50 or whatever, as long as Nepal wants us to be around. But our function now is to really look at whether the underlying causes of the conflict are being addressed, and therefore the peace process, is it going to stick or not? And we support the government, the people of Nepal, in making sure that happens. Obviously the Office of the Human Rights, Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights has another, is very much a part of that team, in fact, because the underlying issues, the long-term issues about human rights, about impunity, are issues that are going to take a generation to really address properly.
So it's going to take a longer while.
It's the
human rights issues, because
the human rights issues are, yeah, I think the issues of impunity, when you start to unpack the issues that are in fact laid out in the Comprehensive Peace Agreement, this is not a UN agenda, but when you look at the CPA and the issues that, the kind of Nepal that the parties to the CPA want to build, issues to do with, addressing this culture of impunity, establishing human rights, on a much firmer footing, shall we say. These are things that are, when you unpack them, it's about rule of law, it's about the effectiveness of the police, it's about the effectiveness of the judicial system, it's about the status of women, not only in Parliament, but in the home even, and the extent to which they have property in their name. These are all, enormously complex and long-term issues. They're economic, they're social, they're cultural issues that are going to be tough to deal with. So, yeah, all of these issues, these root cause issues, are long-term undertakings.
Your Excellency, with the UNMIN dominating the UN's role in Nepal, at least in the media and in public's eye, now with the UNMIN going in a few months from now, how will the UN see its future challenges and prospects in Nepal's development?
The future of UNMIN is yet to be written. All we know today is that it's just had an extension of its mandate up to the middle of this year. So let's see what happens next. But irrespective of that scenario, the UN's engagement in Nepal's peace process isn't going to waver. We are, and we have to be committed for the long term. Certainly, as the peace process shifts gear into a new phase, different parts of the UN system are coming forward to assume their responsibilities. And my UN family, the development actors in particular, now really moving into center stage, because that's where Nepal needs us. Up till now, the preoccupation has been with security issues, for example, arms monitoring. But I think the next phase of the peace process, my sense is going to be more and more about the tangible changes in people's lives that need to happen to make sure that the transition is sustained. So we've been talking about arms monitors now, up till now. More and more we're going to be talking about issues like food security, about the quality of education, the types of fundamental priorities for parents and students all over Nepal. And that's where my part of the UN family has to deliver its peace dividend.
What is the major focus of IMF, the major objective, and why does the world need IMF?
Well, the IMF was founded in 1944 to prevent a recurrence of the depression of the interwar period. Its task is to ensure stable exchange and international monetary cooperation, which will help to promote the growth of international trade and with it rising living standards and high employment. The IMF has two tools at its disposal to achieve these goals. The first is policy advice. We are talking regularly to our 185 member countries. We discuss the economic challenges with the authorities of each country and possible policy responses. Especially with respect to the current situation, the IMF is also uniquely positioned to provide global analysis of the linkages between the financial sector and the real economy.
The IMF has been supportive of Nepal's financial and economic endeavors. How do you assess the past and present, and what are the future prospects of cooperation?
Nepal has been a member of the IMF since 1961, and we have had a very fruitful relationship. I'm happy to say that relations with successive governments have been very cordial, and I look forward to continued cooperation in the future. Nepal has borrowed from time to time from the IMF, most recently between 2003 and 2007, when the IMF was providing assistance under its concessional lending window. This lending was designed to augment the reserves of the Nepal Rashtra Bank, as is always the case when the IMF provides money. Fortunately now, Nepal is not in a position where it requires financial assistance, but of course, if that should happen in the future again, we stand ready to provide such assistance. The IMF is also providing technical assistance in various areas, most importantly in the revenue administration, tax and customs, and also to establish a single treasury account which will improve the government's control over its finances. Until very recently, we have also provided technical assistance to the Nepal Rashtra Bank to improve financial supervision.
How do we differentiate between the displaced population and those who are termed to be a refugee?
The words displaced people and refugees are often used interchangeably by the public and by the media, but there is a difference. Refugees are defined in an international convention, the 1951 Refugee Convention, and refugees are people who've left their country, which means they're outside their country, for reasons of persecution, human rights violations, serious human rights violations, for reasons of political opinions, race, ethnicity, religion, etc. So it's a clearly defined definition. Displaced persons can cover these people, but it can also cover other notions. It can cover internally displaced, which means people who may also have, for human rights violations, been displaced within their country and not crossed over border. And it can also be economic displacement, like migrant workers who are going abroad.
Whenever there is a civil war, or whenever there is a conflict of any kind, it's clear that people will be displaced, people will migrate out, refugees will be created. In that context, why does not UN have a mechanism of pre-preparedness?
I mean, there's obviously the political level and the humanitarian level. The political level works between government with government, so I will speak about the humanitarian level. At the humanitarian level, there's a lot of contingency planning, preparedness planning, and so on that is ongoing at the level of the UN together with the governments. OHCHR, the Office of the Coordination for Humanitarian Affairs, takes the lead in this, but each agency is also very active. UNHCR has a whole section that is emergency preparedness, that trains people to intervene in emergency situations, like the one that has just gone, the teams that have just gone to Pakistan. They do contingency planning with governments, way ahead of a crisis that could happen in order to prepare everybody to plan for such a crisis and to intervene, and that is very helpful.
Is there any specific focus on women and children?
Indeed, women and children are very often the ones who are most impacted by such disasters when they have to flee with very little and find themselves often without the men in situations where they're not protected. and efforts are being made by UNHCR but also by others to, as quickly as possible, make sure that special systems are set up for single-headed households, for women, to address issues of sexual and gender-based violence, to protect children who may have been separated from their families, and to look after separated children, unaccompanied children, trace their parents, and a lot of measures are taken now to make sure that these issues don't come in the end. There was a time where food and shelter seemed to be the first necessity, but I think now you will see in emergency preparedness and in emergency response that major efforts are sort of undertaken to make sure that the people are not looked at as a group of people who fled, but as a group of people with specific needs, and these specific needs need to be addressed.
Is lack of fund often the constraint?
Indeed, lack of fund can be a constraint, especially for forgotten crises, people who've stayed in camps for many years, like to some extent the Bhutanese here in Nepal, but also other caseloads in Bangladesh, in Thailand, and so on. Sometimes funding comes difficult after many years. In an emergency situation, it's easier to raise funds, even though when it's a mega emergency, it can be difficult to get the funds at the right time to kind of really be able to deal with the emergency. But situations that linger on for many years, that become protected situations, it gets very difficult after a while to raise funds, and then it's very difficult to implement the programs. And it is obvious also that in the context of the global financial crisis that we're now witnessing, that it's going to get more and more difficult to raise funds for humanitarian situations. The funds that UNHCR receives are voluntary funds for the largest extent, so governments don't have assessed contributions, but they voluntarily contribute to the organization, and with the needs at home, it may get more difficult to raise those funds for humanitarian assistance.
Mr. Ian, due to the recession, security challenges and logistical problems, to what extent Millennium Development Goals will be compromised?
I think that we don't fully yet understand the impact of the global financial crisis. How will it affect aid? How will it affect government spending? How will it have an impact on people's lives? From UNFPA's perspective, I think that we're very concerned that there are gaps already in aid flows in terms of support to reproductive health, population and gender. We know that the MDGs are still a challenge if we're to meet them. So we would hope that donors are still able to maintain the commitments that they've already made. In terms of government spending, again, it's the same issue. We need to make sure that spending is not shifted away from those kinds of priority actions which will have a real impact on the lives of people to achieve the MDGs. We know that there are some very straightforward and inexpensive strategies that can be employed to make sure that there's a lasting benefit for people. For example, family planning. Family planning is not an expensive way of dealing with development challenges. If we can encourage donors to continue to live up to their commitments, if we can continue to support governments prioritize on those issues which are really going to have an impact in people's lives, then I think there's a way of riding through the current crisis in terms of finance. But the global situation just reminds me how important development actually is. By ensuring that we do meet the MDGs, by working hard to reach the peace and development in countries around the world, that is a very effective way of actually addressing the root causes of financial crisis, or indeed insecurity, or global climate change. So there's an added urgency, I think, in this difficult time to keep focused on development.
Can you explain very briefly the key areas of UNFPA's works in South Asia and especially in Nepal?
Globally, and also of course here in South Asia and in Nepal, UNFPA seeks to help governments make sure that every birth is safe, every pregnancy is wanted, all young people are free from HIV and AIDS, and that all women are treated with dignity and respect. To do that, we work in 3 areas. We work in terms of reproductive health, we work in population, and we work in gender.
Can you explain in simple words, why does a society need human rights?
Human rights are inherent in every human being from the moment they are born until they die. In order to fulfill these human rights, governments have certain duties that they have agreed to at the international level and at the local level. Human rights goes way back in history with the formation in 1945 of the United Nations. And the Charter of the United Nations includes respect
for the human rights and dignity of every individual. 3 years later, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was proclaimed by all the member states of the United Nations.
It's very real that in developing nations, the concept of human rights feels like it's an imported concept, the way probably the human rights offices function. How do we explain that it's actually a local product?
In fact, sometimes it's said that it was the Western states that developed the Universal Declaration. There were around 18 drafters, countries that drafted on the drafting committee of the Declaration. And I checked on this, and only about 6 of the 18 were Western states. Amongst the other 12 were both China and India. And I noticed as well that the suggestion for the Universal Declaration for Human Rights actually came from Cuba. So there is perhaps a lot of misunderstanding about the universality of human rights. But it's about universal values. And sometimes when I'm asked whether the rights are Western, I might reply with another question. Well, which of the 30 articles in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights do you disagree with? Do you think that the right to life is for one group or another, or is it universal? The right not to be tortured, the right to education or to health. So this is the promise of human rights, that it is established for all humanity, that they are a set of universal standards, and that while they are established by common agreement at the international level, the responsibility for delivering those rights is at the national level.
Normally we see that after the investigations are over and a report is formed, it's released into media, it's all over the media, and common people feel that the perpetrators will be brought to justice. But we don't see that happening most of the time. What happens after the reports are released?
Well, we certainly don't give up at OHCHR. We continue to raise these issues with the responsible authorities, and we have also been raising them at the international level, for example in the Human Rights Council, which we discussed earlier, and where the High Commissioner makes an annual report. But ultimately it's the responsibility of the government authorities to follow up on those cases and to bring about justice. We do notice that when these commissions are established, and there are several commissions, that we do not see the reports of those commissions. They are not released to the public, and also we don't see the follow-up to the recommendations of those commissions. And I have to say that the follow-up to the recommendations of OHCHR also leaves something to be desired.
At a stage of post-conflict and democracy restored, surprisingly we have seen several incidents to curb press freedom. During the last 3 years, the journalists have received threats, have been abducted and have been killed. It's been the highest ever compared to before. How can journalists seek support from your office in this regard?
Well, Santosh, you're quite right that, of course, press freedom and freedom of expression generally is essential for any society to function well. In Nepal, the situation is a little different from some other countries that we see. Environment for press freedom is good. However, what we are seeing is threats and violence against journalists committed by political groups and criminal groups. And therefore, the responsibility comes again on the state to protect journalists from this kind of intimidation and violence. And if it occurs, to bring the culprits to justice and to bring out the truth. From our office, we have been conducting different workshops with groups of journalists. We chose to conduct most of these workshops in the Terai, actually, because it was the most insecure part of the country. There are also networks to support human rights defenders, such as the EU Human Rights Defender Network, which we are working with, and that includes providing support for journalists to increase their security, and if they are threatened, to provide some protection for them.
When the MDG was incepted in 2000, the leaders of all these developed countries had committed that they will support the alleviation of the poverty. It seems that you're not happy with their promises because they didn't keep it.
Yeah, I mean, it's the promises which have been made have been, the beauty of the Millennium Development Goals is that it is a global compact, so the rich countries committed on Goal 8, which is not just about aid volume, but also aid quality, because we have big problems on the quality side as well, because it's not just a matter of how much money they give, it's what kind of conditionalities are attached, how much policy space is available for developing countries, how much of it goes back to their own country, so there are all of those factors. But there's also the debt cancellation, and we've seen some progress, but there's still some way to go. And finally, the trade part of the Goal 8. The trade talks have been deadlocked for a long time now. The Doha round didn't go anywhere. So they have not met their commitments on several counts. And I must say there's some who have, and we have to celebrate and we have to honor them. But the others who are missing on their commitments. But the Global Compact was not just about the commitment from rich countries. The primary responsibility is with the governments of poor countries, because ultimately the issues of the Millennium Development Goals, which are so basic, meeting the basic needs of people, that is primarily a problem which is being faced by citizens of poor countries. So governments of poor countries have to take primary responsibility, and many of them have not kept their promises either. So it's both sides, are culpable.
So besides lack of fund, are there any other factors or major factors that affects the progress of MDG goals?
No, in fact, in my view, we should not give too much attention on the question of external financing, because that, of course, is important for poor countries. But first and foremost, the question is how much of our own domestic resources we are applying towards the achievement of the goals. And increasingly, the problem is not even about whether we have allocated money in the budget. I know Nepal has had a budget recently, and the money is allocated. The problem in most developing countries is that even after the money is allocated, it doesn't reach the people. So there's a big issue, you call it whatever you want, of governance, of accountability, of corruption, of mismanagement, of inefficiency, so all of those factors. So some countries we don't have the right policies, some places we don't allocate the right resources, but almost in all countries the money doesn't reach the people because of system failures.
Since the initiation of MDG in 2000, how far have you progressed in terms of poverty alleviation?
Well, the latest report from the United Nations Secretary General has just come out, in fact just 2 weeks ago, which gives the 2009 updated progress. And in fact, I must say, when these goals were signed on, I was not in this job. I used to work for an NGO, and I was one of the people who was a bit skeptical about them. Because, these things, our leaders meet, they make all these promises, every year the UN, there's some conference, and I was very skeptical about it, as I think most people on the street would be. But if you take stock of where we are today, 9 years since the goals were signed, I would say that the progress has been surprisingly good, particularly if you take income poverty. I think there's been quite big progress. Education, 40 million more children are in school. We've saved at least 2 million lives of children under the age of 5. And all of this has happened, because of the concerted focus on these goals and a deadline of 2015 that we have to meet these goals, we have to hit these targets by then. Having said that, there are still many challenges, and there are many countries in the world who are not on track to achieving all the goals. But progress has been quite significant.
Thank you for being with us. We'll be back next week at the same time with another special episode. Till then, good luck and goodbye.